Welcome back to another Trailblazers we love. So glad today to have Jared Tang joining us. He is the founder of Gaggle Social, which is a network and hiring platform for the tech space. Jared, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to tell you a little bit about what I'm working on, my thoughts on some of the things you're talking about. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you. Being that you help tech companies find good talent, I thought you'd have some really interesting insights to share on the Salesforce space. Just if I could, I'd love to learn a little bit more about how you got into the Salesforce ecosystem.
Sure, sure. So that starts actually when I was in recruitment. We were utilizing solutions internally as well as working to staff for enterprise technology. At the time, I was focused very heavily on NetSuite recruitment, and we were utilizing Salesforce to pretty much track all of our sales process from keeping notes to putting in new entries, and obviously keeping clean records is really important. So it became something that I became a little bit addicted to, right? It was making sure that my records were always on point and that the information that I was putting into the system was accurate. And I ended up falling in love with it. And when Gaggle Social started, it was and it still is one of the most important areas that we focus on.
So you're hiring for Salesforce positions at these companies as well?
Yes, yes, Salesforce, Oracle, SAP, AWS, sometimes multiple at the same time where we'll see, Salesforce roles that are expecting Salesforce experience and AWS experience or some of the other adjacent technologies.
Well, that's awesome. And I'll make sure to put the link to Gaggle Social's LinkedIn in the comment box. So anybody wants to look into them, learn a little bit more. So, for somebody that's entering into the space and they're trying to learn as much as possible, I know that there are a lot of resources to learn more about Salesforce, but what are some that you really like?
Yeah, you hit it on the head. There are tons of resources out there from, sanctioned things directly from Salesforce directly, or what users or Salesforce professionals are, sharing with the world so that way they can improve everybody else's life, which I think is the most phenomenal thing in the world, honestly. 'Cause one of the biggest questions that people have bringing to the system is that, right? And I think some of the main or most important pieces to consider for Salesforce resources are things like community groups and conferences, which really allow you to maximize your opportunities to meet hiring teams, network with new folks, or just make friends, right, who can help you along your journey. Another important one for me is always to like to read, I like to listen to things. So the Salesforce admin podcast and blog is incredible. It's very useful for admins looking to optimize systems or get started in the space. I think another tool that I definitely can't miss out talking about would be Talent Stacker's Trailblazer mentorship program. So as a shout out to Bradley Rice, but as a business that also supports and sponsors this program, I can't share enough how important it is that people have accurate information and have someone who can kind of be unbiased to make sure that they're following the track right, and they're building their career path correctly, because it can get, kind of caught in the weeds, and then you can kind of get caught and turned between too many different directions. And oftentimes, having somebody to keep you on track, having someone to hold you accountable, can be really helpful in not only personal development but also professional development and growth, especially if they're a non-biased party. And I think last would be a shameless plug to Gaggle Social, which, streamlining the way that we hire for Salesforce, allowing people to not only advertise their skills and apply more effectively, but also network and post content to a location that's pretty much dedicated and designed solely to the tech space.
Yeah, it really is interesting. I was looking into how you're like streamlining tech hiring, which I know is a really complex process because people have to have very specific skill sets. So thank you for doing that. That's really awesome.
My
Um,
pleasure. And it honestly comes from, really trying to myself understand where the complexities really lied, right? At the end of the day, recruitment is such a huge, important part of this industry, but it's also very expensive and a lot of teams can't afford it. So, what is the happy medium that allows people to, still keep that industry relevant, but also in the same fashion be able to handle it themselves if they just don't have the budget to do so?
yeah, absolutely. It's interesting your recruiting background and then starting your own company in that space. What kind of led you to take that leap?
Yeah, I mean it's it's honestly an interesting story. I would say that really the biggest piece that made it the most important to me was that at the very early point when we were being interviewed and training for our role, one of the biggest indicators, or I guess you could say one of the biggest areas that they would talk about the most is the intrinsic value that you receive from being able to help people do things. And the byproduct of the money was also a huge helper, right? At the end of the day, everyone needs to make a living. And because this is a service that many people couldn't quite, or I guess a process that people really couldn't always quite do on their own without having some guidance or direction or even some help, it really lent the question of, what is it that you're doing or not doing that I'm doing with the same solutions, right, that you have? And like, it all avenues pointed to the general platforms just not being sophisticated enough for such complex needs, right? At the end of the day, somebody may have experience in Salesforce for 6 years, and it's hard for a hiring manager who's in a rush to review that information, do the mental math, even though that's not like, a lot of math to do. But oftentimes they'll get overlooked due to, missing keywords, automation that's blocking your way, in a lot of different areas. And in realities, a lot of the times we would find that some of the same people who would be applying for the role that we would kind of share with them had already applied previously. So we'd have to kind of nix them and put new ones in play that, either better fit the need or not. So really was the question, right? The question of where and why this process itself isn't as sophisticated as as systems are themselves.
Yeah, awesome. And I highly recommend anybody watching this go follow them on LinkedIn. They're doing awesome work helping people find really rewarding careers. So I really appreciate that. When we talk about Salesforce, it's there's just so many products these days now with Agentforce or Data Cloud or Sales Cloud CPQ, what have you. So this is kind of a hard question a little bit, but are there any underrated Salesforce products in your opinion? And then given your space of helping people find careers, are there any particular clouds that you feel like represent really good areas of opportunity for people that are looking for new careers?
Yes. So you're right. The tools one is really hard to put a thumb on, right? They're so expansive and everything can do so much, and each feature sometimes has multiple features inside of it, right? So
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to exactly say one that stands out the most. But one I would say, as someone who has really only played the super user role within the Salesforce system, because I'm not, a certified administrator, I would say that the most important tool that I've utilized that's underrated would probably be the Salesforce Optimizer,
Hmm.
which is pretty much, it's really not spoken about very often. It's a native tool to the system. I believe it released in 2017, could have been 2018, and they've improved it ever since. But it pretty much does the guesswork for you in finding problems or gap within your Salesforce org. It analyzes the performance and offers actionable insights to help improve your system. But I would say the trade-off primarily with this app would probably be that it can't provide as customizable support or insight as you might need for your business, right? It's going to tell you really, where your implementation might have went wrong. It'll tell you where there may be some, overall gaps in information or some things aren't kind of functioning or operating the right way. But then it is up to you to customize those suggestions and insights to better fit the business's requirements and make sure that it keeps up with your well-oiled machine of a business.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're running optimizer reports for people all the time. They don't even know that it's something that they can do for themselves. And I think it's a good like first step, and then it often requires like a deeper dig. But it definitely is a good initial diagnostic to kind of find some low hanging fruit and things that might be causing some issues. And then on the second part of that is, like for somebody that wants to maybe start a career in the Salesforce ecosystem, where do you see opportunities? And I'm putting you on the spot here, so you know, don't stress it. But is there like some area that you think that will have more career opportunities, be it CPQ or something else?
I think CPQ is always going to have a lot of opportunity. I think it's been something that's really been on the upswing for some time now, and I think it continues to become more important. And I think that as the systems advance, some of the core features in clouds would be probably the most important areas for you to really focus on. Not when I say that, I mean in contrast to some of the industry specific clouds, right? I would say that where I'm seeing the most is still in the Salesforce Sales Cloud direction, right? And the apps that associate with that. And I would definitely say that understanding the foundational basics is becoming something that is no longer enough. So getting deeper and deeper into the Sales Cloud, say, educational path, as well as the functions within the system, so that way you can maximize your return on investment and open up more opportunities for yourself to build out better areas of the solution. So that way you're kind of maximizing your real estate within the system, I think is really important. But I think a standout also would probably be at this point, Marketing Cloud. Now, and the reason I say that is because with businesses ramping up a little bit more than they have in the previous months as well as years, we're seeing a lot more advertising, and it's really easy to get away from your advertising and let the data get away from you, right? To a point where you're no longer sure about, how much you're spending for, per each channel as a whole. So keeping an eye on that, kind of understanding all of your analytics is going to be huge. But being able to convey that information to people who may not have an idea about marketing, and maybe they're the CEO of the company and their background isn't in marketing, but their background's in budgeting. So understanding a little bit more about those insights and being able to optimize those dashboards has been what I've seen a trend more recently for teams that are of scale.
Awesome. Yeah, really appreciate your insights because obviously you're the person that, is seeing what companies are looking for. So I thought it'd be good. So, Marketing Cloud, if anybody's listening, make sure that you brush up on that. There are a lot of areas of opportunity there. I'd be really curious for a Salesforce prediction that you may have for 2025, let's say, or just the future more generally.
Yeah. So one that I've been kind of noodling and talking about and researching quite often over the past couple of years, I'd say about a year and a half at this point, is going to be a little bit of a hot take, but probably a controversial opinion on my end. And this is a prediction that I'm analyzing over time and recognizing a change in the way that hiring teams have been posting their jobs. I even did a talk about a similar concept when I was at Witness Success. Shout out to Stacey Whitaker for that one. Got me involved with a couple of folks to talk about an area of concern regarding how important it is to match every portion of the job description itself, and what are they really asking for in that process. And I think to talk about this, and I say this loosely, not to instill fear, but to get everybody kind of ahead of the curve, right? Is that, kind of due to the recent, analysis that I've seen or that I've been conducting, some of the current requirements of most roles on the market, I'm predicting a decline of the Salesforce specialist role as we know it today. Not the Salesforce specialist role as we know it tomorrow, but as today's understanding of the Salesforce specialist role, I think that we're going to see a shift in that. And here's why. Honestly, Salesforce rapidly expanded and grew very quickly, both not only in number of companies, but also in people who are becoming professionals or experienced in the in the space entering into the job market,
Mm-hmm.
which has created a very saturated field. So companies are now facing an overwhelming number of what is being coined as look-alike applicants for Salesforce roles.
Mm-hmm.
And it's making it difficult for them to differentiate between each applicant and find the unique characteristics, traits, and skills off of what we're just seeing on a simple resume, right? So what they're doing in response to this is employers are raising the bar by adding skill requirements that extend far beyond just Salesforce expertise. And then they're nurturing those candidates when they enter into their pipeline. And they're often, seeking experience in adjacent systems like AWS, NetSuite, Oracle, Sligo, SAP more, right? So you're still offering salaries only aligned with the Salesforce sector or the specific role that they're hiring for, right? So this mismatch is reflecting a growing demand for businesses to maximize their hiring team scale and return on investment on their hiring processes. And we saw a similar shift to this in Microsoft Office. So once it was considered a specialist role, right? Everyone was like, oh, you get to learn how to type. And, that wasn't something that was as common back in the day, was to utilize computers for some of these things. And then, PowerPoint and all the other suite for the office kind of came out and it became a really hot commodity for you to have those skills. But then as time went on, proficiency in Office became expected. So now it's like a baseline expectation. And it's not
Right.
even really mentioned as much in job descriptions. But becoming a fundamental skill that professionals must pair with broader systems is kind of where Salesforce is going, seems to be going down in that direction, right? So, and that's where they're going to be able to stand out in such a crowded market is to showcase a proficiency, or at least understanding of the adjacent technologies that may touch that same technology or maybe, within their stack. So to stay competitive, I think Salesforce professionals should focus on diversifying their knowledge, gaining at least a foundational understanding of popular adjacent technologies that, it can provide a significant edge for them, and it'll help them not only differentiate themselves from others, but also it will increase their overall business systems acumen.
Yeah, it's really funny that you say that because probably once upon a time, Excel proficiency was like something that was highly in demand, and now it's like the most generic resume filler sentence. I find that most people are much less proficient in Excel than they claim to be, but that's just as
Yes.
someone that likes spreadsheets a lot. So that's also really great insight that you're sharing. So somebody coming into the Salesforce space now versus 10 years ago, they're dealing with a lot more competition. So having, a solid understanding of other adjacent technologies definitely is important to help them stand out. And also, we're seeing in the era of like one-click job application submittal processes, like you're saying, these companies are getting thousands of people in an hour or two to respond to some of their job postings. So that's why it's really great the work that you're doing to help them find the right candidates because they don't have time to sift through that.
It becomes a really frustrating cycle, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you think about the overall time spent in that, one of the biggest time constraints is actually evaluating those applicants and going ahead and saying, okay, you look like the last guy, and this guy looks like the last guy, and this gal looks like the last guy, gal, or guy, and so on and so forth, right? Until you get
Hmm.
to a point where you're like, kind of all of my you kind of get to a point where either all of your shortlist look exactly the same or 90% of your shortlist doesn't even meet the minimum requirement of the role, right? And that in and of itself, going through the 400 applicants is so unbelievably time consuming, frustrating, and almost mind numbing. You get to a point where you're tired going through it and everybody kind of looks the same anyway, even if they're not the same, right? And that's called resume fatigue. So our not only is our goal to resolve that, but with the same tool with our skills matrix that is resolving that and allowing people to evaluate, skills quicker, as well as apply to jobs. It's also going to list in a very easy and organized view of what other technologies that you may have experience in. So that even becomes a little bit more obvious as a whole. So that way you kind of have a nice quick table that showcases how experienced you are, what technologies you worked with, what kind of roles you played within that space. So, I definitely appreciate you taking that peek into our system and seeing a little bit about what differentiates us.
No, yeah, it's really awesome, and I think you made so many good points here today. So everybody should go follow Gaggle Social if you're looking to find a job or just to network with other people in the ecosystem. Jared, friends of the pod or of the Trailblazers We Love series know that we always like to end on a non-Salesforce related topic, just because we want to show that we do have interests outside of Salesforce. I know that's a crazy notion, but can you give us a good recommendation? Anything, a book, a podcast, a cooking show could be something that you're enjoying these days.
Yeah, and that's a hard one too because there's so many cool things in the world, right? But you kind of get so bogged out into and tunnel visioned into the professional life, and sometimes you forget about the things that are de-stressors, right? So, one of the things I'm doing a lot lately is I'm watching this show called Forged in Fire. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but it's on History
No.
Channel. And effectively, what they do is they take iconic weapons from history and they recreate them within a very, very limited time crunch. And the tests are barbaric and brutal and not necessarily the best part of the show. But watching them be able to turn molten hot steel into, these fantastical shapes and sizes and lengths and the challenge that they have to go through to get this within the exact parameters, it really showcases the craftsmanship of something that, we've over the past, I gotta say, 100 or so years, have automated a system for and built it so that way, lasers cut out the shape of a knife and then they put
Right.
a handle on it and they sell the whole kit at Walmart for you to, have cooking knives. But you're watching these people do it by hand and create things that are going to get abused, right? Hit really hard against rocks and things that steel should not ever have to be manipulated to do, but they're doing it, and they're they pay well for it too. It's a hard challenge, and it's great to see how humble they are. And the community really, to me, is very reflective of what the Salesforce community is like, where, even though they're in a competition sometimes, they're there to help each other. I mean, if you can't tell you how many times competitors will stop what they're doing to help another competitor, do something that requires two sets of hands. There's this process where they twist the metal so that way you create a pattern in it. But the gentleman who had to do that, he weighed too little, and the machine he was using wasn't staying on the ground. So it was another competitor came over who was a little bit of a heavier body and helped to stabilize that. And that person who ended up asking for help, he went to win. And it all was due to the help that others provided, right? And I think that it's very indicative of what the ecosystem as Salesforce as a whole kind of provides, which is an area for lending, area for learning, an area for development, a judgment-free zone that really allows you to be yourself while also being in a professional setting.
Well, I'll definitely have to check that out. In this era of 3D printed everything, probably our smithing skills have gone
I'd
to the
say so.
wayside. But thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Have a
Thanks so
nice
much
day.
for having me on. I really appreciate it as well, and it was great to talk to you, Sam.